Welcome back to Crawford-Clark Close-Up. We're closing out 2018 with the final review in our Christmas series, and we've saved the 1946 James Stewart-led It's a Wonderful Life masterpiece for last. For those uninitiated with the story, the greatest Christmas film of all time is based on Philip Van Doren Stearns' 1943 novel The Greatest Gift, and stars the inimitable James Stewart as protagonist George Bailey, a man with big ambitions, wanting to make a name for himself and shake off the dust of his hometown until a number of setbacks force him to remain there and start a family. When a shortfall of $8,000 is lost by one of the family, who is also an employee at the building and loan on Christmas Eve, a destitute George attempts to commit suicide before a guardian angel tries to convince him of just how bad the world would be were he never to have been born. From the main titles in all their traditional storybook-style glory, accompanied by Dmitri Tiomkin's beautiful score and instrumental of the Pickard family's Buffalo Gals, we launch into the picture, and the first striking element in the casting is how the young George, Mary and Violet capture the mannerisms of their adult counterparts pitch perfectly. Robert J. Anderson, just 12 at the time of filming, imbues George with humour, curiosity and heart from the outset, making it all the more obvious that he would grow up to become the brilliant James Stewart. We first meet young George in 1919, where he saves his younger brother Harry from falling through the ice in a pond and ends up deaf himself in one ear as a consequence. The shocking moment comes minutes later, where Old Man Gower, the druggist, slaps George around his ears until they bleed for not delivering the capsules, only to discover that George was trying to save him from prison for accidentally putting poison into the capsules. Anderson is afforded less than 10 minutes of screen time as young George, and still manages to give us an endearing performance. From here we skip ahead to 1928, where George is 21 and ready to head off to college, after he's attended Brother Harry's school graduation party. Having prophesied as a young girl that she'll love George Bailey until the day I die, young Mary blossoms into the beautiful Donna Reed, and the chemistry between she and Stewart is dynamite. The sequence at the graduation party, where George and Mary are reunited and dance the Charleston, unaware that the floor is opening up and they're about to fall back into a swimming pool, is brilliant fun and an example of the great comic timing Stewart had. James Stewart's personification of George Bailey is of the ultimate everyman. Determined to help others in need, even if it means constantly jeopardising his own happiness and putting his dreams on standby, I'll argue that George Bailey is the single greatest, most empathetic character in cinema. That he's brought to life by the one-of-a-kind James Stewart is just the cherry on top of an already delicious cake. There's such a rich amount of characters and brilliant scenes in the film. George offering to lasso the moon and give it to Mary is perhaps the single greatest romantic gesture in the movies, and there's plenty of humour laced throughout. A subtle standout being George, the cab drivers, and a random passerby staring at Gloria Graham's perfect adult Violet as she tosses her hair and walks seductively across the street before one of the cab drivers decides to head home to see what his wife is up to. It's a simple scene, perfectly executed and written. At the first chance for George to shake off the dust of Bedford Falls, he winds up staying for his ailing father, who suffers a stroke, to ensure the security of his father's institutional building and loan company. After his father's death, George stays to straighten things up and has to remain in the town for longer to manage the building and loan to save it from falling into the hands of odious Mr. Potter. Veteran actor with over 200 screen credits to his name, the brilliant Lionel Barrymore plays Henry F. Potter, one of the most vile villains in cinematic history. From a young age, George stands up for himself and his father against Mr. Potter, and the only thing you wish, as the audience, is for Potter to get his comeuppance at the end of the story. I suppose symbolically he does, as everyone flocks to George's aid in the emotional ending, but it would have been nice to see Potter get his just desserts in a literal sense as well. Years pass and Harry returns from college married, to the immediate dismay of George, knowing he's stuck again at the building alone and will likely never escape the trappings of Bedford Falls. George visits Mary, who's returned to the town, and ends up embracing her and marrying her. As they're about to head on their honeymoon as Mr. and Mrs. Bailey, George discovers that the building alone is in trouble, and he has to put the money he saved for he and Mary into the bank in another selfless act to help those around him. Determined that Potter won't destroy the building alone, George puts everything into the company and even rejects Mr. Potter's offer to work for him, realising that he'd be making an enormous mistake, but more importantly that he'd be going against everything that he stands for and letting everyone down. Uncle Billy mislays the money he's depositing in the bank for the building and loan, and the company are about to go bankrupt, leaving George penniless and leading him to attempt to commit suicide on Christmas Eve. George returns home, holding his child and crying tears of helplessness and shouting at Mary. It's a heart-aching scene to watch, but demonstrates brilliant acting once again from Stewart. The angel Clarence comes down from heaven to prevent George from taking his own life and tries to show George what the world would be like if he'd never been born. It's a nightmare vision akin to elements of Dickens' A Christmas Carol that you're desperate to see the end of, but ultimately makes for one of the most poignant final 30 minutes of any motion picture. George gets to live again, and the whole town rally around to come to George's aid when he finds himself in financial trouble. The moment where you need the tissues comes where George's brother Harry returns to the town to declare that his older brother George is now the richest man in town. This is, of course, both a symbolic and metaphoric richness. George has all the money he needs, but crucially, he's a rich individual for the love he's gained from all those around him. I cry every time I watch it, and it's not likely to change anytime soon. Director Frank Capra had previously worked with Stewart on both You Can't Take It With You in 1938 and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington in 1939, but It's a Wonderful Life that Capra rightly regards as his best work, and it's also the late James Stewart's favourite film and his greatest performance, and it's easy to see why. From almost any other director and released in any other time than just after the Second World War, Wonderful Life might seem cloying and pretentious in its message that each man's life touches so many other lives around him, but in the right hands, such as Capra's and Stewart's, it becomes a model upon which all life-affirming stories should adhere. For all intents and purposes, George is a protagonist who it's impossible not to fall in love with. From the outset, we're admiring him for all his self-deprecation and humility, and willing him to succeed, which makes the events of the last act all the more devastating to watch. That the film failed to impress audiences or critics in 1946, a year after the end of World War II, is a mystery. Director Frank Capra won the Golden Globe for Best Director for the film in 1947, but despite being nominated in 5 of the main categories at the Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Lead Actor for James Stewart, the film came away empty-handed. It's a testament to the power of word of mouth, however, that in the intervening 70-plus years the film is appreciated for the incredible work it has always been and is regarded as a staple of Christmas viewing. It's a Wonderful Life is a unique and special film. From Crawford-Clark Close-Up, this really is one of my favourite films of all time, and it deservedly gets... So that's about it from Crawford-Clark Close-Up for 2018. We've gone out with a bang. All that's left to say is I hope you have a very Merry Christmas, whoever you're with, whatever you're doing, whatever you're watching, and I suggest if you've never seen this classic, make time for it this year. You won't regret it. Just make sure you've got tissues handy for that ending. In our final video for 2018, we'll be taking you on a whistle-stop preview of just a selection of the films and TV shows we're aiming to review in 2019. Maybe 1 or 2 of your favourites might be in there. For now, though, thanks for watching, and until 2019, that's a wrap.